Let me just continue on with some of the questions as they surround our situation in CNMI. Dr. Gutnick, you had mentioned in your testimony the discrepancy between the number of unemployed. You had cited 2,400. The governor had cited a figure of 1,800. But as I understand from that, your numbers include the FAS workers in addition to the U.S.
That's correct.
Okay. And then based on the data that you have provided us, you estimate that 2,352 CW workers would be eligible for the proposed new CW3 permit. Does the data that you've been reviewing indicate what kind of occupation those permit holders are engaged in?
Yeah, we have some very preliminary data on that. And not surprisingly, these are workers from the Philippines and workers in the tourist industry. Now, I did take a look, again, very preliminarily yesterday at the number of construction workers who would qualify under the 3-year permit. And there's a very limited number, 160 or so. Now, the restriction in HR 339 is for folks who've been there from 2015. The restriction in this for the 3-year permit is folks who've been there for 2014. So they're not exactly analogous numbers. But the point is the 3-year permits will not go to construction workers by and large, and they will typically go to the workers that are the core of the main industry of the main economic engine in the Commonwealth.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that. A question directed to either you, Governor, or Congressman. With a 10-year extension of the transition period, as we're proposing in our legislation, do you know of any reason why employers would not seek to move long-term CW workers over to an employment-based permanent worker visa? And my understanding is, as we've talked through this, is that this could take maybe 3 to 4 years, maybe 4 years at most. It would then free up additional CW permits for other employment needs. Could you speak to this?
Let me take a first answer that I have, Congressman. I would like to Madam Chair, thank you again. We have the Northern Marianas Business Alliance with us today. They have assured us they're 80% of our total revenue, yet they only constitute 25% of their contract workers, CW. So that makes a big difference on how they approach U.S. workers versus CW workers. They continue for the last 3 years or so. We have more U.S. workers today than we've ever had in the past 10, 15 years. The importance of this extension will continue our success on what we have done in the last several years, because it is important for us as a community, as an island, and also the business partners understand how important it is for U.S. workers to be part of the community. Yet, in order for us to continue increasing U.S. workers, we need the additional extension and, of course, the number of CW workers.
Mm-hmm. Congressman, you want to add anything?
Yes, if I may. Thank you very much. And this is apropos, I guess. 2 weeks ago, a man who came to our office some 4 years ago, asking on how he could convert into a status that is no longer temporary. And of course, we don't provide legal opinions or provide legal advice, but we did, tell him that there are programs, EB programs, that takes 3-4 years. And we provided this gentleman the forms. Only lo and behold, 2 weeks ago, he came into our office and was just gleeful, and he gave us a copy of his green card he copied his green card and showed us and said, well, it was because I came to your office and that I'm no longer a CW worker. Finally, I have a green card. And went through the EB process, and it took him some 4 years. And he actually hired a lawyer to help him do it. And so there are many who could qualify. But Madam Chair, when people are just dependent on CW, people are just really saying, this program will continue beyond 2019. Your decision to stop it. And I hope that it does not come to, well, when we come to 2029, there will be another Congress and we could just get another extension. That is the least of my desire. Is this bill is designed to encourage U.S. workers, and that non-U.S. workers, third country nationals, will fill in the gap where they are needed. That has to that's a reversal of the present condition or working environment in the Northern Marianas now. And I know it for a fact, and everybody hates me for saying these things, but it's the truth, and no one here can deny that. Now, is there a shortage do we still have a need for third country nationals? Yes, we do. That's why I'm supporting this bill. That's why I spent months since last summer working on this bill, because yes, there is still a shortage. But in the next 10 years, Madam Chair, God forbid that we will come back here or somebody will come back here and say that we still need U.S. workers. Because I will, like the gentleman, spend my own money to come here also and remind Congress of what we've gone through. 20 years of transition, and not just that, another 20 years of control over immigration. When they passed that legislation in the third legislature, I was the only member who voted against that bill because it didn't have controls. And I saw that the influx, the door was going to open, and all the influx. I voted no against that bill that opened the Northern Marianas to third country nationals. Not because we didn't need it, but because there were no controls. But this bill, the one we've worked on, I think provides sufficient controls to encourage, to suggest, to urge companies to hire U.S. workers. They have done so in the past 3 years. An increase of 1,000 every year of U.S. workers, in the workforce, U.S. workers. And that's only because, thanks to you, you have said 2019 is the dead timeline, and this is a timeline that's not going to move. Fortunately, we're here, and I agree, we need another 10 years. But again, God forbid that we'll ask for more after this.
I agree. I don't want us to be here 10 years from now saying we haven't yet addressed the issue that we see very well in front of us. Let me ask you, Assistant Secretary, the role that the Office of Insular Affairs plays in the CW permit program. What role, if any, and what are the efforts? Well, CNMI obviously is working to hire U.S. workers, but does the Office of Insular Affairs play in that at all?
We really do not. I mean, we, as long as there's a moment here, strongly support a vibrant economy for CNMI and all the territories and freely associated states. These are very challenged areas that we all care about, and so that's why we do the funding that we do with your providing the money, and try to work hard to increase their economy. They need labor on the island. They have a huge expansion going on, which is great news for them. And but yeah, you're correct. We do not have a direct role. It's labor or DHS or others.
Thank you just for clarifying that. I mentioned that Senator Cortez Masto had asked several questions along the line that I was going to proceed, and this is again directed to you, Assistant Secretary, just in terms of the trust fund itself, and I think some real contradictions in terms of the position of the department with regards to control. On the one hand, the statute says that the secretary may approve expenditures not to exceed $2 million in any year for income from projects, and And yet you maintain that in terms of what you're going to follow and how you're going to follow it, there is, in my view, what you've shared with the committee has been less than consistent. Also reconciling the terms of Section 4 of the amended Resettlement Trust in terms of what happens then with regards to any unused funds to be deposited to the U.S. Treasury. I don't think that the answer that you gave Senator Cortez Masto was very clear. You've indicated that perhaps you need to visit with your solicitor, but know that this committee is very interested in understanding clearly where the lines are being drawn, and if you are selectively interpreting different or aspects of the statute, we certainly want to know and understand the logic there. I want to turn to you, Mayor Gibas. With the resolution that you all passed, you essentially say in that resolution, because nothing in the applicable public laws gives the Secretary of the Interior a statutory authority to approve of the budget, the 1990 Memorandum of Agreement, which lays out that approval process, and that was signed by the Bikini leadership, is null and void, that no longer is in play. Is that a correct statement, as your understanding, and that of the council? Go ahead and push that button. Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity once again and for the question. I just want to get it straight on record that we operate on a budget that's approved by the elected council. And latest and recent resolution was passed by the council for the rescript from DOI.
Right. And when you passed that resolution, you effectively said or determined by resolution that the 1990 Memorandum of Agreement that sets out the approval process is no longer applicable.
Yes, correct.
So within the laws, the applicable public laws that provided for the funding of the trust fund, they state what the purpose of the trust fund is. So when this was established and when those federal dollars were put in this trust fund, the purpose of the fund is, and I'm going to quote here, that the terms of such resettlement trust fund are hereby modified to provide that the corpus and income may be expended for rehabilitation and resettlement of Bikini Atoll. So what I want to understand here is if we're looking at what is authorized, what is appropriate for using the trust funds is for rehabilitation and resettlement of Bikini Atoll. How, with these expenditures that you have just made in these past couple months, that you've indicated in your testimony, you've indicated that the dollars have been spent for the $11 million. Not all of that has been spent, I understand that, but that you have directed dollars for renovation and building of houses that were damaged by tides, and for providing health care for those outside of Marshall Islands, and providing for educational scholarships. So you've indicated in your testimony that that's where these funds have been spent, but how do those relate, how does that expenditure relate to the purpose of the trust fund, which is rehabilitation and resettlement of the Bikini Atoll?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, we look at the Bikini Claim Resettlement Trust Fund, a trust fund that's supposed to resettle the people of Bikini.
Right.
And as we both understand, this money is not enough to resettle the people of Bikini. At the same time, as we encounter many challenges through the time of climate change, and as we try to survive on these isolated islands with not enough financial and facing health issues and education problems, all this comes together, and we try to make sure we provide for the people. And this money is not enough to relocate. That answer the question.
Well, I understand what you're saying, that $11 million isn't sufficient to relocate. But again, these are funds that have been placed in a trust, and over the years, the purpose here, again, according to the Resettlement Trust Fund, was to provide for the rehabilitation and the resettlement. I guess I'm trying to get specific rationale for the decisions that you have made recently with these expenditures of funds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In recent years, we have trying to live up the Resettlement Trust Fund for the people of Bikini. And as I stated in my statement earlier, that the U.S. Claim Tribunal awarded the people of Bikini $300 million, but it came only $110 million. So I noticed that in this administration, we cannot relocate on this such amount of money. But with all the challenges we're facing, we come as one, the council has approved the risk group by trying to make sure they can create income-generating projects. And I heard in your earlier statement that we're trying to buy a ship, and we're trying to buy an airplane, and we're trying to lease an airplane if we can get such amount of money from our trust fund. With the limitation of the 5%, we cannot get any money such amount to try to lease a ship or an airplane, trying to create other income, other source, try to make sure that our people can live up at least some of these interests in the next few years or decades. We try to look and oversee our future encounters for our younger generation. And we see that with the limited trust fund and with the restriction of the trust fund, and this is why we don't agree with SBL 21882.
Well, let me ask the question then, because it was Mr. Niedenthal who suggested that I think I'm going to sum your statement here, that you agree that there needs to be oversight, that you think that S 2182 is a little bit too restrictive with the specific drawdown cap. You have suggested that we need to ensure the long-term viability of the trust is still feasible. I think you have suggested that written approval of a long-term budget is appropriate. Mr. Mayor, would you agree that approval of a long-term budget would be a responsible level of oversight, or not?
Excuse me, Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair. We do not look at long-term budget at this time.
Well, have you as a council compiled a budget, short-term and long-term, for purposes of the trust? You've drawn down $11 million of it. You've indicated that you haven't spent all of that, but do you have a budget for that?
Yes, we drawn $11 million in the last few months, just under the indication that we were trying to create these generating projects for future income. But at the same time, we only did this because we noticed there was a rumor that the office was going to stop us and restrict us on the limitation, and I cannot feel...
What office?
the designated office, who is as the approval of the budgets. Could be OIE, Interior, or we heard that somebody was going to put a restriction on our budget and that we cannot get off. We will put with the limitation of the budget, we cannot live off that. And
Isn't it accurate, though, that on average, the distribution on an annual basis has been about $5 million?
on average, yes,
On
maybe
average.
six.
So you were worried that you were going to be, it was going to be limited to less than $5 million?
Right, correct.
And you were concerned about that from who?
Through the council, as we have worked along in this year, trying to find the best way to make sure our people can survive. Because no question, if the Interior gives us a budget of $4 million or $3 million, I will have to cut off the power and make sure everybody's not on payroll and no food, no fuel, no education request, nothing, because it's not enough. And we had to take out that money and put it in one of the banks. We know that we could have put it on the market and make the interest, the returns better, but because of the rumors that the office or somebody in the departments, I'm not sure, that want to put the restriction on our money so we can only get $3 million or $4 million a year.
But you recognize that that trust fund is limited,
Yes,
right? And so that maybe putting you on a budget at less than the people would want is financial stewardship and recognizing that the trust fund is not just available for full consumption and disposal for the people today, but that the people of tomorrow and future generations would hopefully be able to derive some benefit.
yes, thank you, Madam, again. Yes, that's our both you and the Council of the People of Bikini's main concern. How can the people of Bikini return to Bikini? It's been 72 years. How can we feed the people now that the trust fund is lower and the interests are not as good? And we are trying to, so we come together and pass a resolution that we should create generating income projects.
And and I understand that communities that are threatened by climate change are vulnerable, that repairing or rebuilding new houses is expensive. But the purpose in my questioning is this is the first time that you have not had any oversight, and again, the oversight has been minimal. It's a discretionary right of veto, and yet you have drawn down more than twice, almost 3 times as much as has been afforded on an annual basis. You have a fund that is limited, and I'm trying to understand why the KBE Local Government Council believes that this level of funding is necessary, why you would object to oversight by way of a long-term budget, and just making sure that there is an appropriate process. Because what has happened with the Department of Interior's very sudden and unannounced decision that they were going to completely withdraw, although I think it's been confusing, Mr. Secretary Dominic, about how much completely withdrawal means with the department here in terms of your oversight. And this committee has a responsibility. This committee has a responsibility not only to the people of Bikini, but to the federal taxpayers as well. So I'm just trying to make sure that I understand fully what's going on, and that there is a fair fair process moving forward. Mr. Niedenthal, I wanted to ask you, because I mentioned your suggestion and your statement that you think that perhaps the approach that we've taken with a limitation on the drawdown, a cap on the drawdown, might be too restrictive. Given the current level of the fund, is it possible to ensure the long-term viability of the trust, in your opinion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think what's being ignored here quite a bit, and I'm a little concerned about this, is the history of this. You had 40 years where the people of Bikini had nothing. They were starving. They were struggling. And then this trust fund came into being. A lot of people, and this has been completely ignored, a lot of our people worked really hard. Senator Tamaki Judah, who's struggling with his life right now in Hawaii. We had former NG Balos, Senator NG Balos, Nathan Note, Kathaiser G-Boss. We had all these people who worked so hard, Ralph Waltz, Nijima Jamori, Johnny Johnson, all these Bikinians who worked so hard to get this money. We traveled thousands of miles. We don't have a representative in Congress. We had the lobby for that, and we're in the middle of nowhere and nobody cares. I mean, the seats are all empty except for you. Thank you very much. And this is like, it's always like this for us. And so now what happens is, for us, when we were out there and we saw this happen, this all happened, I saw this resolution, there was no public hearing for that resolution for the people of Bikini. They passed it in an hour and a half in a little room above the town hall. No Bikinians got to say, hey, what's going on here? And I saw it, my son showed it to me, and I said, there's no way that doesn't even pass the laugh test. And then along comes Interior and says, yeah, it's okay. It took us several days to get the secret letter, and he already contradicted what the senator's questions was. There is, in his own letter, he says they do have a responsibility for that $2 million on Kili. So I'm sort of like really confused about how all this came down. And then you talk about how they didn't inform Congress, how they didn't inform the RMI government, they didn't inform the State Department, the embassies out there. Nobody knew what was going on. We're all of a sudden hearing all this stuff, and then all of a sudden there's $11 million in a bank account, and there's like no public information about this. We kept saying, hey, let's have a public hearing. Let's talk about this. This is our future. I'm a grandfather. And when you talk about the long-term viability of the trust, I mean, it's outrageous that Interior would do this to us. That trust fund, those people worked so hard for this. It provided $220 million over 30 years. And they're trying to say, oh, they never had contact with Interior. That's completely false. We were in contact all the time. We had no choice. And that system, they had total independence and total freedom over that money. The only number that was negotiated every year was the total amount. Interior would look at talk to our money advisors and get them an amount that would assure the long-term viability of the trust, and then the Bikinians were free to do anything they wanted within that number. It was a system that worked, and suddenly everybody decided to break it. And now all of a sudden, as you said, $15 million, that's 20% of the trust fund. And you're talking about, is there long-term viability? I'm really scared. Because what's going to happen, and they can say whatever they want. You have Assistant Secretary Dominic saying the Bikinians are not going to come back to us anymore for money. In Mayor G-Boss's testimony at the end, he says, we're not coming back to the U.S. for money anymore. But I'm going to read this again. No matter where the Bikini people found themselves, even if they were adrift on a raft at sea or in a sandbar, they would be taken care of as if they were America's children. Nobody in this room has the right to break that promise that was made to the people of Bikini in 1946. Not the mayor, not the assistant secretary. When that money runs out and these people are starving, he's talking about, oh, we're not going to have payroll if we this or that. When this money runs out, no payroll, no power plant, no anything. Where do you think those people are going to go to? The RMI government? There's no choice here. There has to be made, the suggestion I'm making is go back to the system that produced $220 million over 30 years. It wasn't broken. I'm just astounded that the Interior Department would come in and do what they did. It's the worst thing that happened since the Bravo shot in 1954, in my opinion. That they have threatened the people of the viability, not of the trust fund, they've threatened the viability of the people of Bikini to survive. What's going to happen to these people when there's nothing left and you have a bunch of rusted ships, rusted cars, a plane? I mean, these aren't, I mean, if you've lived in the Marshall Islands for as long as I have, no one out there runs a successful shipping business. Zero. No one makes money on that stuff. Planes, come on. There has to be oversight for everybody's sake, for the United States government and the commitment they made to the people of Bikini, and there has to be oversight for the people of Bikini to survive. And if you don't do it, believe me, the first door I'm coming back with my 5 grandchildren by the end of this year, God willing, I'm coming to the United States government, and I'm knocking on that door. You're not going to have a choice but to answer me. And if you don't take care of this now, you're going to be taking care of it later. And that's all I have to say, and I'm sorry if I'm a little, I'm the son of a ball turret gunner from World War II, so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let me ask just a couple more questions to wrap here. This goes to you, Mr. Dominic. So you've made a decision with this letter with regards to the Bikini Resettlement Trust Fund. But we've got other resettlement trust funds that are out there. We've got the Rongelap, we've got the Marshall Islands Trust Fund. Given the position that you've taken with this administration, would you expect that there be a similar view of these other settlement trust funds?
Well, thank you for that question, Senator Chairman. You're right. There are a number of trust funds that exist all in the Marshall Islands. Actually, it's a surprisingly large number that relate either to the nuclear, specifically to the nuclear testing, and/or the larger compact agreements that are in place. I assume that's the one you mean by the Marshall Islands Trust Fund, would be the compact trust fund. And as I mentioned earlier, that is structured completely different up front by Congress in terms of who manages the money, and it's very robust and meant to last forever, et cetera.
What about Rongelap?
Yeah, on Rongelap, my understanding, again, at this point, is that it is structured very similar to the Bikini Trust Fund with the discretionary right of veto for the secretary over the budgets. However, that process has never worked. There's not been a, not in a bad way, there has not been a need for that kind of oversight for the Rongelap community. And so we have no sense of whether they would come and ask for the same.
So just so that I can understand is, I understand that the cleanup on Rongelap and the ability to resettle on Rongelap is further along than we are with Bikini. Is there a reason for that? Is there a significant difference in the level of funding that we have with the annual budget for Rongelap? What's the differential here?
That's a good question. Of course, the cleanup of both Bikini and Rongelap are really run separately in a separate appropriation by the Department of Energy. So they're the ones actually cleaning the islands. And in the case of Rongelap, they have been able to clean it to a level that people can actually live there. And the Rongelapese want to live there. So 40 some odd citizens have already relocated back to Rongelap. It's a little different for Bikini. The likelihood, just historically, at one point they were moved back to Bikini, and then it was determined that it was not clean enough for human habitation, so they moved back off. And that's my understanding, the status at the moment.
But is it because of funding in their again, their annual budgets that Rongelap budgeted more, or
Yeah,
can you give me more there?
And again, I apologize. I believe that is done by the Energy Department. In other words, I don't think the Rongelap people use their trust fund for the purpose of cleaning the island.
But you
just like the
mentioned that
Bikini
you've
people
got,
don't.
structurally, the trust funds are much the same, so there's a discretionary right of veto that DOI
That's
or
my
the
understanding,
Office of
yes.
Insular Affairs has had. So you must look at that on an annual basis, that longer-term budget.
I apologize, I'll have to ask my staff, but I assume so.
Well, I do think that that we've had some issues raised here that deserve answer from OIA, from the Department of Interior here. I am concerned that you have, I think, confusing interpretations of some of the statutes that that are in place here, and how those are reconciled. I understand again that from the mayor's perspective and from those who are on Bikini, the desire to effectively control your own destiny. I also understand that that levels of oversight that allow for that flexibility while still maintaining a some level of appropriate control is something that, whether it's Congress through the appropriate committees or our departments typically engage in, that is appropriate. So I've never been one that says that the best decisions are made at the top. I'm kind of a from the ground on up type of a person, but I also recognize that when we put in place trust settlement agreements, that there is a purpose, there is a level of oversight that is appropriate not only for today's leadership but for subsequent generations. And my interest is ensuring that we are being good stewards, not only for those today, but for those tomorrow. As it relates to CNMI and our legislation, again, I thank you, Governor Torres. I thank you, Congressman Sablan, for your willingness to work with us to, I think, get to a good place. I think we had some good testimony today. I think we recognize that CNMI has come a long ways over the years in terms of labor practices, in terms of working aggressively to ensure that, as you say, Congressman, we've changed the dynamic there in terms of U.S. workers and the expectation that we will have more U.S. workers. So I feel that we are on a good trajectory here. It would be my hope that we can address this soon, because as we have been told by Dr. Gutnick, in terms of the numbers and the applicable visas that are out there, waivers that are out there, those numbers get snapped up pretty quick here. So this is something that we do want to continue our engagement with you and work to find good, solid solutions. So again, as you say, Governor Torres, we're not back here 10 years from now saying we need yet another extension. So we're working on this together, and I appreciate that. And with that, gentlemen, the committee stands adjourned.